Many startups focus on science first and operations later. Why is it so critical to build a strong operational foundation early, even before a trial begins?
I love this question. I'm so glad you asked it, Cynthia, because this is one of my soapboxes.
Welcome to Life Science Insights Podcast. I'm your host Sandal Karnanidhi, and in today's episode, we'll be exploring the next-gen clinical trials, the biotech foundation, and the future of clinical development. Our guest for today is Suzanne Vyvoda, founder and CEO of Concordia BioStrategies, and she is a dynamic and visionary leader shaping the future of biostrategy and innovation. Welcome to our show, Susan.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you so much. It's a really big pleasure to be here, Suzanne Vyvoda, as you mentioned, and looking forward to diving in with this with you on this today.
Let's start by getting to know about a little bit about your background.
Sure. So, I'll just give kind of a 10,000 foot level overview of my background. It started really happenstance. After college, I really had no idea what direction I wanted to go in. I was passionate about patient care, but I knew, being a doctor wasn't really for me. I was interested in science, but I certainly didn't see myself as a scientist. And I found myself working at a hospital local to where I went to college for a physician whose practice was very much based around clinical research. So in addition to being an MD, PhD, he did a lot of bench research, lab research, clinical research that was investigator-initiated, sponsor-driven, et cetera. This is sort of how I uncovered the fact that there was this whole industry really driving the development of clinical trials of drugs, and that's how things got to market. One day, this guy walked into my office and he had just transferred from another university. He handed me a stack of protocols and said, we need to open these here, at our university. I had no idea what that meant. Didn't know what an IRB was. And I set off to figure out how to do that. And as a result of that, really uncovered this whole industry that's, it's medicine, it's science, but it also takes regulations, it takes compliance, it takes finance, it takes, all of these different partners, sponsors, CROs, sites, vendors, patient advocacy groups that have to bring it all together. And I quickly discovered that the people writing the protocols probably didn't have a good understanding of what being a coordinator at a site was. And that's really what I eventually kind of became early in my career was a coordinator. I was doing everything from learning how to draw blood to taking EKGs to running around frantically looking for a centrifuge in order to spin that blood down and ship it, wherever it needed to go. I was a jack of all trades, helping with many different types of clinical trials, but also getting to interact directly with the patients and understand their journey, their decision-making process. What makes them join a clinical trial? What made them feel comfortable doing that? Why did patients decline joining a clinical trial? And all of that was, I think, a really important part of my foundation. It was starting there at the clinic with a doctor, with patients, with some absolutely brilliant people on all sides, getting to know CRAs that would come to my site from various different either CROs or sponsors, getting audited, all of these different things that occur at the site, really getting to partner with physicians and understanding that patient care pathway in oncology, specifically in this case, and how a clinical trial can fit into that pathway or maybe doesn't fit into that pathway. From there, I spent my career spanning clinical trial sites, CROs, and sponsors. And over the past 20 plus years, I've had the pleasure of working in big companies, in small companies, on the sponsor side, on the service provider side. I've been on the road. I've been to site visits. I've sat as head of clinical operations and head of development operations for emerging biotech. I've gotten to see a lot of different things over the years. I've had some good luck. I've moved around and I've really pursued this as my career. That foundation gave me a window into that patient and their experience. And that, I think, has made me incredibly passionate about making clinical trials better, not just for the stakeholders who, they're important for. They're important for sponsors. They're important for investors, et cetera. But they're really there in order to improve patient care. I think that in addition to that, over the past 20 plus years, I've seen some amazing innovations in science and medicine and some on the operational front. But I think the operational front still really lags in terms of how we do things. Okay, we don't use fax machines anymore. There's much less paper ETM, paper TMF, paper data capture, et cetera. There's much less of that, but there's still so much to be done in terms of innovating within this industry. And I think a lot of that is that we have such a fractured ecosystem. We have sponsors that work according to one model.
Right.
We have CROs, service providers, vendors, labs, tech vendors, et cetera, that work at a completely different model. And we have sites that actually see these patients that get sort of stuck in between all of this with often, not a great understanding in terms of who and why and what all of what's coming at them really means. We have an industry that takes an average of $2 billion to commercialize a drug with
Yes.
a 90-some% failure rate.
Yes.
So we have a lot of opportunities too to improve our efficiency, both from a timing perspective, but also from a capital perspective. How can we make clinical trials more accessible, more affordable, more efficient? And so that has, really driven my career, especially the latter part of my career. I never intended to be a founder or anything of that nature. And I'll admit this is still, whatever Concordia becomes is still in its infancy. But after an acquisition at the end of 2023, and kind of entering a market, this has been a biotech winter for a couple of years now. Really tough markets, very difficult to raise capital.
Right.
And we've seen so many programs fail. We've seen big pharma lay off teams in droves. So it's not just the little guys that are struggling. It's the whole industry that's struggling, whether you be part of a CRO, a sponsor, a CDMO, all of these different industries, all these different pieces of the industry are really struggling. So at first, this was just a way, to lend opportunity and expertise where I saw the need. So it was fractional operations consulting, advisory work. And then I decided it could maybe be something more. Number one, we've still not recovered from this recession that we're in. Number two, people still need high-level strategy, high-level operational expertise with people who are willing to actually get their hands dirty and execute on it. But what I've also seen is a lot of lack of fluency across the whole ecosystem. There's so many tech providers, for example, that are leaning into AI and trying to build tools for this industry without really understanding, many of them, what the industry is or how it works. We have so many executives that are struggling to raise capital. And now it's harder than just going out and pitching to VCs with amazing science. You need a bulletproof operational plan, a commercial strategy, et cetera, that's going to actually get you there. You need to be able to show those investors that it's more than science, that it's executionable. And I think that's where our industry is currently struggling.
Yes, that's an inspiring journey, and there is so much to learn from your experience.
Well, that's very kind of you. I to be honest with you, it's just been one step at a time and trying to plan, my next move one step at a time. There was a point in my career where I thought being head of clinical operations would be it. That's as far as I would get. That's what I would strive for. And that was something that I achieved, and I'm thrilled to have achieved. It's amazing to build a team from the ground up. It's amazing to be part of an IPO. It's amazing to be part of an M&A deal and really contribute to seeing not just how your clinical trial works, but how the industry as a whole works. I've had the luck of partnering with some amazing leaders who let me sit in some of those rooms, let me contribute to some of those initiatives. And that gave me a lot broader perspective on not just what does this clinical trial mean, but how do I execute it and what does it mean for the overall business objectives of the company? And I think that's what a lot of folks miss, especially in operations. We get so heads down in crossing our T's and dotting our I's and following our regs. And I by no means want to minimize that. But I think operations leaders often struggle because they can't necessarily translate that picture into what the executives need to understand, which is how does this impact the business? How does this change impact my timeline, my budget, my burn rate, et cetera? What is the ROI that is attached to bringing on an additional vendor? Those are not easy skill sets to
Right.
learn.
Yeah.
And I have learned them one step at a time, one room at a time. And because I've been lucky enough to be surrounded with some leaders who helped me understand that bigger picture.
What the story behind the name Concordia? Does it reflect a
That's a great
specific?
question.
Yeah.
No,
Does it?
so sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Does it reflect a specific philosophy or approach to collaboration in clinical development?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. What I was looking for was something that meant cohesion, harmony. What I see most prominently again is silos. I see them within companies. We see them within CROs. We see them within sponsors. We also see them across the ecosystem. We see spreadsheets being thrown back and forth via email. We don't see systems between sponsors and CROs that talk to each other. We don't see real-time data analytics.
Right.
We can, but we don't. And we accept this. We accept these old tools and technology that's 20 years old, and that because we're partnering with companies, service providers, vendors, et cetera, that we can't necessarily behave as a whole. Concordia stands for the goddess of harmony. And to
Oh,
me, I think the biggest thing that we need to achieve in order to really move the industry forward is a more harmonious approach between the sponsors, the CROs, the sites, the vendors. These poor sites get what, 13 different logins to how many different systems, and all this technology that they don't get great training for, and
okay.
they get 7 points of contact between the CRO and the sponsor, and a good luck. And then folks wonder why people aren't enrolling in trials. I think there's a better way that we can do it. And so that name is sort of, it's an ambitious name, but it's
Okay.
meant to call
Call
out
out.
what could be within the industry.
You described yourself as a fractional C-suite leader. What does the role mean? Why is it becoming so valuable
Sure.
for emerging biotech companies?
That's a great question. And that's one aspect of the things I do. But I think the reason that fractional, well, let me back up. What does fractional actually mean? So if I'm a tiny company and I want to hire, say, a CFO, that person is going to be the most experienced level person that I can get. And they're going to come with an appropriately high price tag, a full-time salary that may range from 300 to 600 grand, a benefits package, equity, bonus, etc. That is a really expensive person to hire. I'm just giving you that as an example.
Okay.
If we want to hire a chief medical officer, that person has spent how many years in training and is also really expensive hire, operations, CMC, regulatory, legal, all of these different pieces that we have to bring together in order to build a cohesive company, say on the sponsor side. But at the beginning, when you have very little capital, therefore very little resources, and you may not even have enough work to hire a full-time person, do you
Right.
even need one? So fractional means that that CFO might provide his services to 3 different companies or 6 different, and as a result of that, those 3 or 6 companies all benefit from someone who has decades of expertise in
Wow.
finance or in whatever their field is. But they don't have to bite off the price tag of hiring that person full time, of giving that person benefits, of giving that person a massive bonus at the end of the year that person may expect. It also gives that person work. That person may not be able to find the full-time job they want in the C-suite. But if they can support a number of different companies, they too can still be successful and profitable. So there are advantages on the candidate side, and there are advantages on the hiring
Hiring.
side. If you don't have a lot of resources, but you need expertise, you have to find more creative ways to find that expertise. If you have that expertise and you can't find a job because no one has the capital to hire you, you have to find more creative ways of offering those services. So yes, fractional expertise in operations at a clinical stage company is one service that I offer. That's how I started out my consulting career. It's not necessarily everything that I do. In fact, I found a lot of much more efficient ways to offer those services that I've kind of discovered along the way. But I think fractional is so popular right now
Right.
because our funding environment is so difficult. And because we still have founders, we still have doctors, we still have scientists that are trying to move important products forward. They're trying to take steps in their company and they need more expertise, whether that be financial or fundraising or medical or operational in order to do so. And we're getting more creative now about how that expertise can be provided.
Many startups focus on science first and operations later. Why is it so critical to build a strong operational foundation early, even before a trial begins?
I love this question. I'm so glad you asked it, Cynthia, because this is one of my soapboxes. So I'm going to try
Yes.
to, stay grounded here. But to me, yes, 100%. That is traditionally how we've done it. The reason that we shouldn't do it that way is that I see science and medicine and operations as a duet. Think of two instruments that are playing together in harmony. Sounds beautiful, right? Now, look, the operations is nothing without the science. We
Right.
have to have science, medicine, breakthroughs in order for operations to mean anything. But in order to make that science real, operations is a much more critical component than I think a lot of people anticipate it to be. We can't just create a beautiful trial on paper.
Right.
That protocol is going to guide everything that we do for that trial. And there's often this ethos that, that protocol is what it is, and operations is there to either, fit a square peg into a round hole or to manage a CRO that's then going to operationalize that protocol. Operations can be so much more than a vendor manager, than a PM, than a CTM that oversees a CRO. In addition to that, the CRO again operates under a completely different business model.
Right.
Of course, they're there to work for the sponsor. They're also there to run a business, a service business. So they're serving the sponsor, but they're also serving their own business model, their own
Right.
clientele. And their business model is not synonymous with optimizing for time and speed and money for a sponsor. That's just not how they work. And they work in a completely different environment.
Right.
So a senior level operator not only can help you optimize your protocol for the real world, will sites want to participate in this? Where will we find patients? Where should we run this trial?
Hmm.
There are plenty of scientists and medical professionals that know bits and pieces of this. But the regulatory environment is a big piece of it. It's actually knowing the boots on the ground. How is this going to work? Will a patient agree to this? Will a site be able to run this? Where is this going to get stuck? How will we get hung up in recruitment? Are we going to need an amendment right out of the gate that's going to cost an additional, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars because we run into red tape with regulatory feedback, et cetera? Have we spoken to any patients in terms of what's important to them? Will patients want to enroll in this trial? So having operations involved then from the very beginning to really orchestrate that trial from a harmonious perspective, again, the medicine, the science, the operations together allows you to get to a much smoother vendor selection process,
Okay.
a much more obvious operational pathway. And operations is going to have some ideas on how to execute things,
Hmm.
whether that be different countries, different technology, et cetera, that might really optimize what that ROI is. They might be able to make your trial go faster. They might be able to make your trial cheaper, frankly. That's the plain way of putting it. But these two disciplines work best in harmony. Now, that doesn't take out things like preclinical, CMC. Really, it is a cross-functional effort to get a product from, idea through commercialized product. But when we start running clinical trials, we shouldn't run them in a vacuum. We should bring all the stakeholders that are part of making those trials successful together in order to make a trial that's going to be successful. So that's the short end of it. I could talk the entire hour, Cynthia, about why I think operations is so paramount. But I think the other piece that I'll add here is operators on the sponsor side particularly aren't often in the room for those strategic conversations. They're not taught that there is a business strategy. They're not taught that there's a commercial angle. They're not taught about what the regulatory piece is going to look like. They're just responsible for overseeing the CRO. However, the CRO and any related costs, they're 70% of your operating budget if you're a clinical stage company. We're giving these folks a lot of oversight without necessarily allowing them in the room and teaching them how what they're doing impacts the business. And that's one thing I see a lot in leaders as they grow. They're still in the weeds. I do this myself. It's so easy to get caught up in the details of a TMF plan. That's ultimately it's critical. It's important, but the CEO doesn't care about the TMF plan. That's not something that they're necessarily going to hone in on. And again, whether it's a small company or a big company, especially in a smaller company, understanding how all of those pieces come together and finding that company-based cohesion across each different function really sets the stage for that early success. Going out early and thinking about which CRO is the right partner isn't just about your first in human trial. It might be that you want one CRO for that trial and a different CRO for every trial after that. It might be more efficient to find one CRO and build a partnership with them that lasts through your whole entire clinical development plan. It might be that you need a regional CRO because you're targeting a specific type of patient, and those patients are found in the Asia Pacific region or in Europe or wherever. You might need someone that's much more global in nature. You might need someone who has a specific therapy area expertise. So again, I think the vendor selection process, and I hesitate to use the word vendor because I really think that CROs, sites, your lab vendors, your ePro, but they're partners. They need to be partners in a trial. So a vendor makes them sound less than what they are. But I think that's often how we treat them on the sponsor side, right? Let's just hire a CRO, let's let them manage it, give them the keys to the kingdom. And then we wonder why we don't understand what's going on and the timeline doesn't match what our expectations are. And we're looking at a change order we didn't expect. Well, we're reacting at that point. We're not driving. We're not setting the stage. We're reacting to what someone's then giving us. And at that point, we've lost control. We've lost the edge.
Right. Yeah, that's a great explanation.
Thanks. And apologies, that may need some edits, some cleanup, but overall, I think you'll probably have something decent from that.
Sure. Okay. What are some of the most common operational pitfalls you see when biotech startups move from discovery to the clinical?
So the first one really is that protocol. It's getting that protocol right. It's really easy to think that we can crank out a protocol, we can submit it to the FDA or whatever regulatory body we're working with. We can always change it later. That's actually really expensive to do. A protocol amendment can range, depending on the impact from $50,000 and upwards, depending on whether you've submitted it to regulatory bodies, to sites, downstream impacts that may change your EDC, your other vendor systems, your product labels, your site manuals, et cetera. There's so much work that goes into that. And so getting the protocol right, everything is a trickle-down effect from that protocol. That's the first thing that I see. The second thing that I see is reaching out to a CRO, getting a bid, and running with it. A CRO is going to put a significant markup, that's their business model, again, on any trial, on any business that you're going to get. So going through a really thorough RFI, RFP, bid defense process really allows you to assess the right fit for your trial.
Right.
Are the right team members going to be in place? Or are they going to be, the famous bait and switch? Here's my A team. I'm going to give you the C team.
It
This happens in small biotech all the time.
all the time.
There are ways that we can work around that. What does the contract look like? Do they have the right therapy area expertise? Is the contract really going to benefit the way I want to run my trial, or is it not? Are there extraneous items in that contract that don't need to be there? What are we really outsourcing versus what is being done in-house? And I think this is a huge pain point because CROs don't provide you with bids that are apples to apples. It's a mess trying to kind of sort through what they're providing and how it compares from one CRO to the next. So that vendor selection process is important. And then once you select your CRO, making sure your contract is exactly what you want and is clear to both the sponsor and the CRO in terms of roles and responsibilities is really important too. If you just sign what the CRO gives you, you're giving them the keys to the kingdom. And you're also demonstrating to them that you don't necessarily know what you're doing or how it needs to be done. I really encourage a very thorough strategic deep dive on these contracts. I encourage sponsors to think really thoughtfully about what it is they're trying to accomplish, what they really want outsourced, what they really need the CRO for, what they don't. I also encourage sponsors to really think critically about the compensation structure for that CRO. Are they just paying the CRO every month, no matter what the CRO does? If things are behind or over budget, and the CRO is directly responsible for that, are there penalties to the CRO for missteps like that? You can build that into a budget. It's not necessarily a popular thing to do, but it's definitely done. Why not base your budget on milestone payments too? It'll reward the CRO when they're ahead, when they're on top of their game, when they're absolutely nailing it. But if they're falling behind, they really have no skin in the game from a contractual perspective to fix it, unless there's something built in that says, if you fall behind to this extent, I mean, I won't dive into that in any minuscule detail, but treat them like a partner, build a partnership, but build that around a contract that's mutually beneficial, not just something that is going to, we're going to just, the CRO is going to bill us every month. We're going to pay them what they're going to charge us. It's going to be what it's going to be. Every 6 months or so, we get a change order. Timeline's longer. Patients are recruiting slower. Again, we're reacting instead of being proactive and establishing that partnership. The sponsor ultimately has to hold the cards. They have to set themselves up for success that way. And then what I often see too is, say none of that's done quite right. Say you're down the road, you're enrolling, the CRO's not performing the way that you want. You've got team members involved that really aren't performing the way that you expect. The timelines aren't meshing between what you have internally and what the CRO has. Then that's what I call a rescue. Everything's kind of gone off the rails. And I think that's another opportunity for strategic operations to help, whether that be bringing in someone external like me, or, really taking your internal team, going back to the drawing board and resetting expectations and re-looking at how everything's set up, again, internally, externally, with partnerships, et cetera, because we sort of accept that these things will take longer than we expect. Should we? I also think that and I don't want to feed the AI hype, but there are so many good tools and technology that we can use now that are compliant with regulations, that are not dumping everything into ChatGPT, which please do not do. But that can really enhance our ability to provide a better experience to sites via education, via streamlined portals, via less vendors, less logins. We need to be assessing how the site experiences a trial. I can tell you, having been at a site, I am much more likely to pay attention to the sponsor that treats me well, that understands who I am and what I do, what my pain points are, and tries to make it easier for me than the sponsor who sends me stuff and just assumes that I will figure it out because that's my job.
How do you help companies balance speed to clinical with the long-term sustainability and compliance?
Yeah, this is really tricky, and it's a really good question. I think this is something that will be evolving and we'll be paying really a lot of attention to over the coming years as we navigate the space that biotech is in.
Mm.
I think number one, it's providing fit for purpose services. It's not just going out and hiring a COO or a head of ClinOps and then a director and then a CTM and then a CTA the way that sponsors typically do. It's not just defaulting to your buddy who's the CEO at XYZ CRO and they'll give us a good deal. It's thinking strategically and paving those foundations early and building fit for purpose solutions that allow you to kind of bend and flex with what your needs are. Fractional is a great example of that. You can bring in someone to help you with your protocol before you need that person full time. And that person can help you ensure your protocol will be something that's operationalizable down the road. That's an example. You can bring someone in to help you think through vendor strategy before you actually have to go through it. So you're prepared to go out of the gates and hit the ground running. We celebrate first patient in for every trial, and we should. It's a big deal to get to that point. Startup is massive. But the reality is, we need to be focusing on last patient out. So we have to be thinking about how to optimize our processes way past that first site activated, that first patient in. And I think that we need to do that through smarter internal team structure, smarter use of CROs and other service providers, and smarter use of tools and technology. And my goodness, again, we could talk about this for hours.
Okay.
But I think there's a better way to do it. And it's looking at what is needed now. It's looking much further in advance, much earlier in the process about what comes next. So rather than planning a trial, conducting a trial, data analysis, planning the next trial, really planning steps ahead to some extent at risk, not contracting, not spending money, but planning ahead for different outcomes. And really thinking about where you're driving value. Right now, people want to see, they want to see value. They want to see value, and they're not necessarily prepared to wait years and years and years to do so. So are there cohorts? Is there an interim analysis? Is there an early readout that you can provide that's going to give your investors some value? So really thinking through that piece of things. I think the earlier you plan and the more planning you do, the more successful you're going to be. And so it's treating operations like that strategic partner, not a downstream project manager after the science is nailed down.
What are few non-negotiable every biotech team should have in place before starting a first in human trial?
Non-negotiable. You need someone in clinical operations. Okay. That sounds kind of broad, but you need someone that's going to oversee the thing. You've got to have someone that's going to oversee your sites, your vendors, whether you hire a CRO, whether you don't. You need someone that's going to steer that ship, that has the expertise to do so. And yep, I'm breaking it down to really bare bones items. You also need internal SOPs. You are outsourcing all of this stuff, and it's not enough to just say we're using a CRO's SOP. How are you overseeing that CRO? The sponsor ultimately is responsible for the conduct of that trial. So even having some basic infrastructure in terms of how oversight is done at your sponsor, at your company, is really critical, is a bare bones item to get going into human trials. And I think the other part is not to underestimate the time, the cost, the intricacy of running a clinical trial. These things are really complex. There's a reason they take so much time. There's a reason they cost so much money. Seeking out strategic expertise early and often during the process, regardless of what your internal or external setup is really critical. And then again, a holistic perspective, getting opinions from KOLs, but also from CROs, from vendors, from sites, from patients or patient advocates that really understand all layers of this journey in order to make sure that you're really thinking of everything that's going to come up. Those are some of the base ground rules that I would set.
How do you see technology, data integration, and automation transforming clinical trial operations today?
So this is really tricky, and it's going to be the chicken before the egg. On the one hand, technology is exploding right now. AI, solutions, integration, and all of that can be great, but it has to be, in our industry, we work in a very highly regulated industry. We have to understand whether that technology is compliant and what it's compliant with, where we can use it. Is it, compliant in the US only? Is it compliant globally, et cetera? And what it actually solves. Are we just adding more tools, more logins to those folks that are already overloaded? Or are we actually reducing process, procedure, time? I see this again as a marriage between operators who understand technology and those tools. Bringing in a new shiny tool won't solve your problems. But if you bring in people that can strategically think about where and when technology may enhance your operation, enhance your ability to find patients, enhance your ability to hit your timelines, enhance your ability to control your budgets, there are some amazing things out there that are being done in that regard. Even to enhance your ability to produce documents downstream from your protocol that are consistent with your protocol. The amount of manual work we do in this industry is underestimated. I live in San Francisco, California. I'm surrounded by Silicon Valley. And one of my favorite cocktail party stories is to talk about how behind tech is in clinical development, in clinical trials, in drug development. I sit with tech leaders, hardware, software, and they look at me when I talk about my spreadsheets and my smart sheets and my PowerPoints and my PDFs and my endless emails like I must be crazy. And to some extent, they're right. But we're talking about human subjects. We're talking about people. We're talking about patients. We're not talking about hardware or software. So the way that we think about how to implement this technology has to be done with a lot of care.
Many sponsors underestimate the complexity of vendor and site management. What are some of the best practices you recommend for building strong partnerships across the ecosystem?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And that's tricky again. But the first thing I would say is to stop treating them like contracted parties, like vendors, and start treating them like partners. I can tell you from being at a site or being at a CRO, when I'm treated with respect versus animosity, that changes the whole tone. And that does not mean that there aren't opportunities for escalations. It does not mean that sometimes you don't have to get someone's CEO on the phone. It doesn't mean that you don't sometimes have to get your CEO to call someone, but you have to set it up with a partnership in mind. And again, I would say that starting early and having conversations with a lot of different CROs and assessing the partnership fit, speaking with their leadership teams, that's so important in understanding what kind of experience you're going to get with that vendor. So again, these are people, their organizations, their partnerships, understand how those organizations work, what drives them, what their business models are, and fold them in as best you can. I think understanding, again, what systems are being used. So sponsors may have internal systems or they may not, depending on how young they are. CROs always have systems, CTMS systems, EDC systems, ETMF systems. Often small sponsors are tapping into those. But what level of visibility does the sponsor have towards what's going on in those systems? How quickly documents are entered, what the QC process is like, et cetera. So really, again, good transparency and visibility across all of your stakeholders. That's partnership. Now, that means that CROs have to give sponsors better visibility into what their processes are, and sponsors have to give CROs and other partners better visibility into what their goals are, because sometimes those goals just aren't aligned. And I've seen it before where the sponsor has some slide that they are publicizing, that they have shown to investors, and the CRO's timeline is totally different.
Totally different.
And no one has stopped to say, wait, these aren't the same. And then, what happens when that happens is, well, we'll catch up, we'll make up time. It's that square peg in a round hole situation. Make it work. Well, that's not a recipe for success. That early alignment piece. What is the deliverable? What are the goals? What are the timelines? What's actually achievable? And getting everyone's buy-in from the executive team with the sponsor to the executive team with the CRO to, again, feedback from sites, feedback from other vendor partners, feedback from patients is a really important part of that process.
Your tagline mentions helping biotech and ecosystem partners save millions and accelerate approvals. What are some of the most effective levers for achieving that?
Yeah, thank you. And I've actually updated that, but that's an important concept. And again, I think that's bringing partners together. It's looking very critically at contracts. Again, CROs have a huge markup on their services. And if we're not really diving into their contracts to figure out what we need and what we don't need, they don't have any incentive not to do that. So, again, it's what is it that's being outsourced? What can be done internally? And what's fluff? What's being paid for that isn't the role of the sponsor? What is an additional oversight layer that is or is not needed? So much of this is in the details.
Yes.
And what I've tried to do with various taglines or posts, etc., is translate that into meaningful steps. But at the end of the day, again, it's aligning those partnerships. It's building partnerships. It's building alliances. It's building alignment. It's building a team, not just a sponsor team with a CRO team, with a site team. It's building a cohesive team that really is truly centered around the same outcome and the same outputs. So that dumbs it down. It makes it sound really simple. Gosh, that sounds awfully simple. How does that save time and millions of dollars and accelerate approvals? Well, again, we talked about this at the beginning. We accept that it may cost $2 billion to bring a drug to market. We accept that there's a really high failure rate. We accept that drug trials will be over time and over budget. Why? Why do we accept this? We can do better for the patients. And what I'm getting at there is using much more thoughtful, creative solutions, optimizing for operations, optimizing for strategy, and really so much more planning upfront can make such a big difference.
How do you approach financial discipline in early stage startup biotech, especially when balancing innovation with resource constraints?
Yeah, great question. So again, really figuring out what does the company actually need. So there's a human capital component to that. Who do we need right now? Can we hire a consultant for that role? Do we need an FTE? Is a fractional person enough until that role scales to have more of a need? There's that internal piece. Who do we need? The way we traditionally built teams was, a couple founders, they'd bring on a medical person, a scientist, they'd start to build out their preclinical teams, their biology teams, their CMC teams, and they build. That doesn't work as well now. So now it's really focused on what do you need in order to successfully move things forward based off of the capital that you have. So it could be really minimal, but we see people raising, a pre-seed round, a seed round, taking smaller steps forward. We also see people raising huge mega rounds that are steps laid long in advance that enable them to kind of push things forward like that. These press releases are really glossy. They always take much more time than I think they allude to. So that's part of it. And then part of it is, again, really thinking strategically about what your priorities are. Your priorities might be run a first in human trial. Okay, so do you have your CMC process optimized for that? Can you get your investigational product where it needs to go? Do you have the right partners to run a first in human trial? Have you done all the preclinical work in order to meet the regulatory requirements? What is the next piece? And it's usually using a first principles approach. What does the science tell us? How much of this can we manufacture and how fast? What is the right clinical pathway? What is the right way to operationalize that clinical pathway? So that's part of it. And then as you think about vendors,
Mm.
as you think about partners, what
Partners.
is a nice to have versus a must have?
Correct.
You get in these rooms and oh, let's add another biopsy. It'd be great if we could get some more samples on this. Before you know it, your budgets start to balloon. Vendors are the same way. Oh, let's add a technology partner for X, Y, or Z. We have to demonstrate how bringing on additional partners, vendors, technology will shave off time or shave off budget at the end.
Mm.
So again, that overall business need, we have to be able to translate that from, oh, look, a new shiny object or a new shiny test to what does this have an impact on in terms of our overall strategy? If we're really lean in terms of capital, we
Correct.
can't do and achieve everything.
Mm.
We
Right.
can't if we want to focus on manufacturing, great. Maybe we build our own manufacturing suite. We go all in on that and we're focused on manufacturing. But then we're
Mm.
not necessarily going to have capital for clinical trials.
Mm.
So we can't be and do and see all the things that we want to. We have to focus our attention and go stepwise and make sure that we're checking off the boxes that we need to as we go. If we're coming through a preclinical phase, have we met all the regulatory requirements for the indication we plan to pursue? Do we know what indication that is? Really being thoughtful and stepwise and procedural and strategic about what is needed and what is a nice to have. That's really what it comes down to.
You act as both a CEO and mentor. What leadership traits do you find most essential for biotech founders entering clinical development for the first time?
For founders, this is tricky because they sort of have to be everything to everyone. So I
Okay.
think there's a couple of things that are really important. And number one, that is translating what they want to accomplish to the rest of the team.
Mm.
The whole team needs to be on board with their vision.
Okay.
And so, feedback across the board. Here's what the science is. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's how much capital we have. Here's how we're going to approach things. And being open to listening to your team. You've brought on these advisors, these team members, consultants, employees, fractionals. They're there to advise you. They're there to help you. Hire people that have complementary skill sets to what you have. Every founder is brilliant. Maybe they're a brilliant scientist. They're a brilliant business builder. They're a brilliant physician, but they won't know and have every level of expertise. So knowing what you know and not know, like knowing what you don't know is a superpower.
Okay.
If I look at myself as a founder, for example,
Mm.
I'm great at clinical trial operations. I've had to learn so many other skill sets in order, to be a founder. And a founder can't be everything to everyone. So it's that give and take, transparency with your team, and leaning into learning the things that you don't know, as well as delegating them to your team members and trusting your team with your vision. And again, that communication across the board is so, so important. That's a big, big piece of, I think, what makes founders successful. I think the other piece is, and this is sort of that emotional piece that's hard, building an environment that inspires people to
Inspires
want to
people.
work for you.
Yes.
People want to work on exciting medicine. They want to work on the forefront of science. They want to see treatments reaching patients. They also want to work for people who are invested in them, in their growth, in their development, in their own career goals. And so I think a big focus is, who do I have with me? What do they bring to the table? And what do they want? How
Okay.
do I help them? Leaders, I think strong leaders are servant leaders. They're focused on their team. They believe in their team. They get to know their team as people. They care about their team. Now, this whole your team is your family, I think that's a nice thought. I think in reality, that's not really true. But I think the ethos is good. Treating these people that you're spending so many hours a week with like slaves in a factory doesn't work. These
Mm.
people are not going to be motivated to sell their heart and soul for you, to get up in the middle of the night, to get on a call with a
Mm.
site in another country. Setting a team up for success means inspiring them, means motivating them, means cheering them on, means providing them with that tough feedback when they need to hear it, but making sure that they know that you are behind them. and that there is a cohesive team, and making sure that those people are passing down what they can from executive team meetings, from board calls, from VC calls. All of those conversations, of course, are not necessarily appropriate for every single employee. But the more transparency you can provide to your team empowers them to give you the best result.
How do you envision the future of clinical trial? Will they become data-driven or AI assisted?
I think it's a combination of both. I do see AI and data as a player. I think it is possible that it is going to change a lot of our workflows, but that human element is incredibly important. We're ultimately treating human beings. We're trying to help human beings, and human operators aren't going to disappear from this puzzle. So it's marrying all of the expertise that all of the people have within this industry with thoughtful, compliant technology that has more integration, that is more harmonized across the different parts of the ecosystem, your sponsors, your CROs, et cetera, and really keeping the patient at the center of everything that we do. We say that we do it, we don't always do a great job of it. So I think that's incredibly important.
Thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. It was truly
My
interesting.
pleasure.
Yeah, an interesting discussion. And thank you again for your time and for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming prepared with such deep, thoughtful questions. I hope this was helpful to everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Sure.